Hi, I'm Molly, the English major, here with a review of Are You My Mother? This is not that children's book by P.D. Eastman. This is a book by Alison Bechdel. This is her 2012 follow-up to Fun Home, which was a huge success when it came out about 10 years ago. It's being made into a play, I believe, and it's just been sweeping the nation in terms of how graphic novels are received. So this is her well-regarded follow-up, and I read Fun Home about a year ago, and I loved it. I loved Fun Home. I loved what she did with her artistry and how deep it really got in terms of being a memoir. It really delved into some serious topics. And so I was really eager to pick this up, so I read through this, and I just have some thoughts on it. So this book, while Fun Home primarily talked about the author's relationship with her father, it's very much autobiographical. This one takes it a step further and goes to her mother. And this book references Fun Home quite a bit, the writing of Fun Home. It takes place only a few years back from much of the narrative, rather than Fun Home, which was mostly during the author's childhood. And as you can see, it's really hard for me to talk about this book without comparing it to Fun Home. But we'll get into that and whether or not I find it better than the original in just a second. First, I wanted to talk a bit about the artistry here. Now, Alison Bechdel is a very well-regarded cartoonist. She's primarily known for her comic strip called Dykes to Watch Out For. She's very much an out lesbian, writes a lot about those issues. And she uses a lot of the same art style in her comic strip as she does here. As you can see, the lines are very meticulous, the faces are lifelike. She really takes a true-to-life approach to her art. A lot of the panels look very similar, and some may think it's a little bit boring, but she definitely lets the art work for her, and it sort of takes a backseat at times to the vivid storytelling, which I find to be a positive. Sometimes in graphic novels you can see it goes style over substance, and this is definitely not the case with Are You My Mother? Similar to Fun Home, you see that it's a black and white with one dominant color. In Fun Home it was green. Here you see sort of this burgundy red sort of coloration, and I really like that. I think it's really aesthetically pleasing, that sort of thing. In addition to the very linear panels, the very conventional like comic strip panels, you see some of these like full-page spreads. I particularly like this one, which is sort of a graph analysis of like the number of therapists and lovers she's had over the last few years, with some annotations on it. And she has a few larger spreads as well. Sometimes she ends a chapter with something like this, which is just a small picture on a large black background. I really like that too. And she has these, and they really serve to break up the storyline. And since this is not a linear story that she's telling, I find this really effective in telling her story. So the art style, definitely a huge fan. So I just wanted to start there. Now in terms of the story as a whole, like I said before, it's hard for me to talk about this without talking about Fun Home. And if you haven't read Fun Home, I would recommend reading that book first before reading this one. It's not a necessity, but she does make a lot of references to it, and I feel like you get a feel for the family as a whole a lot better in Fun Home, and that can lay a nice backdrop for what's included in Are You My Mother? And so, do I like this better than I like Fun Home? And the answer is no. I definitely preferred Fun Home to this. And that's not to say this was an unenjoyable read. I definitely enjoyed Are You My Mother? Some of the issues were that this book definitely is a lot more introspective than Fun Home was, and it talks a lot more about Alison herself rather than her mother, whereas Fun Home was very much about her father. And I think this has a lot to do with the circumstances around the books. She was writing about her deceased father in Fun Home. He was no longer there in the narrative, and so there was a lot of retrospective storytelling, whereas at the time her mother was very much alive when she was writing this book, and very much in correspondence with her, so it became more of a journey of the artist, Alison herself, in interviewing her own subject matter, and about the writing process as a whole, rather than Fun Home, which was more of a traditional memoir in terms of its content. It also comes down to the characters. I found Alison's dad a much more compelling character than Alison's mom. but particularly because he's so unlikable. He's definitely more of a villain. You definitely are much more drawn into his sort of depravity and the way he treats his family. And he has his own flaws too. Excuse me. He has his own flaws. So Alison describes a lot that he was a closeted bisexual for much of his life, had affairs with teenagers, things like that, was also a very cruel, sort of demanding father. Whereas it's hard to get a grasp of Alison's mother. She's very much more of an enigmatic character, very closed off, very private. And I think this is the big thing. She's very much like Alison herself. And a lot of this book talks a lot about Alison's similarities to her mother. And this actually creates sort of a distance in the narrative. It allows Alison to talk more about herself and her own struggles. And while Alison is definitely an engaging writer, I call her Alison because that's who she is as a character. Bechdel is the author. And she uses a lot of psychoanalysis throughout this book. Donald Winnicott, I believe, is the main psychoanalyst she uses. She uses excerpts of his work throughout, and she talks a lot about her own therapy visits. And I found that to be very interesting. I've been in therapy before. I understand how that therapeutic process can definitely help you process some of that information. I did feel that it felt heavy-handed, and it did cause some distancing that wasn't there in Fun Home. I didn't feel as drawn into her conflict because it felt like she was trying to justify every single thing that happened to her rather than letting the anecdotes speak for them herself. There's a lot of analysis of dreams here, and her dreams are interesting, but it seemed like she was constantly looking for that connection to her family in every single dream. And I realized that was her way of processing the information and processing her highly dysfunctional family. Seriously, if you're looking for stories about dysfunctional families, this is up there with The Glass Castle. Like, this is one of those, you really don't want to be in this family. Let's put it that way. But overall, I guess there was this distance here that I wasn't able to get past with Are You My Mother? Whereas Fun Home, I definitely felt like I was really watching that family through a window. I definitely found a lot of the themes here to be very interesting. The whole idea of privacy and intimacy. This mother is a very closed-off individual, and she's very much cognizant of her image, particularly because her husband had committed suicide, Alison's father. She was in the aftermath of Alison publishing that very well-known memoir, Fun Home, and this takes place only a little bit after that. I did love the non-linear storytelling here. That's definitely an advantage. I feel it kept the book very much interesting, and you feel like you're discovering things along with Alison as you read a sort of non-linear story like this. Overall, I found this to be a great read. I would highly recommend this to anyone who enjoys graphic novels, as I do, anyone who likes dysfunctional families, but I would definitely say, if you're going to read this, I would pick up Fun Home first. Bit of a warning, there is some explicit imagery. It does talk a lot about Alison's own lesbianism. If that's something you're not a fan of, this may not be the book series for you. I find it very compelling as a whole. I don't have experience with this personally, but I know a lot of people that do, and I really applaud Alison's courage in revealing as much as she does about herself and her family. This could not have been an easy task, especially with the level of artistry that obviously went into some of these panels. Like, look at this rendering of this Dr. Seuss page. Amazing. It's just amazing how well she's been able to recreate this sort of stuff, and I definitely admire that. So overall, if I was to give this a rating, I would definitely give this a strong 7 out of 10. And it's really difficult to rate this on its own because I am comparing it to Fun Home. Had I not read Fun Home, my rating of this might have been a bit higher, and I recognize that as a fault in myself. It's just really hard not to judge a sequel by the merits of its original. If you've read any series sorts of books, I'm sure you understand that. But yeah, definitely would recommend a strong 7 out of 10. And yeah, so if you have read this book, feel free to leave a comment, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you like my reviewing style, and if you have any suggestions, feel free to let me know. And of course, as always, I would love recommendations as to more books to read. And yeah, thank you so much. Happy reading!